The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law is hosted by the Government Blockchain Association, a worldwide community to connect, communicate, and collaborate. This show is produced by Podtex. To learn more and how to host your own show, go to www.podtex.com. Podtechs. Podtex, your partners in podcasting.
Hi, this is Gerard and Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. And today I've got Lee Bratcher with us on the podcast, and excited to talk to Lee. Lee's doing some great stuff down in Texas. And so he's got a background as a professor. He studied blockchain. He's now very working with the Texas government down there. So Lee, welcome to the podcast, and tell our viewers just a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast, and I'll do just that. Yeah, I'm a faculty member at Dallas Baptist University. I teach international relations and blockchain courses, and I think your listeners will probably think that's a strange combination, and it is. And I got into blockchain through my research into land registries and property rights, and realized the advantages that can be found with a blockchain-based land registry. And so after getting into that space, I just dove in headfirst to blockchain in general, and went up to IBM's Watson Research Center in New York and got trained up there to be a blockchain instructor. And so I teach a blockchain class at DBU, and got deeply involved in the Dallas blockchain community, the North Texas Blockchain Alliance, and then later the Dallas Blockchain Network. And from there realized, hey, there's a need for collaboration. There's a need for some sort of consortium and some organization for blockchain companies in Texas. And so I dove into the Texas Blockchain Council from there.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit. So you told us a little bit about what you did sort of to get into the blockchain, but what was it about this field that kind of drew you into it?
Yeah, it was the elegance of the solution for solving problems with trust, problems with social capital, relational capital. I approached it from a almost a anthropological or social science perspective, and when I saw what it could do, with in the economics realm, I was even more excited. So there's so many pieces, philosophical pieces almost, of blockchain that really got me excited, because I'm a non-technical person. I'm starting to be, I would say I'm quasi-technical now after being in the space for a while and just being around really technical people. But I started out as a non-technical person, and I fell in love with the economics of blockchain and the philosophical potential behind it. And I even went so far as to look into and compare certain types of blockchains to certain Austrian economists, like Hayek and von Mises. And my comparison is that von Mises, people in the von Mises school would be like permissionless blockchain advocates, like Bitcoin advocates, and people in the Hayekian school that are researchers and students of F.A. Hayek, that they would be more in the permissioned and hybrid blockchain space. So that was a little bit more about how I came to really be impressed with and enamored with blockchain technology.
I read this morning that Bitcoin is now the sixth largest global currency in the world, and that's if you think about in roughly about 10 years, it surpassed 170 other fiat currencies.
Wow.
It's really completely staggering.
That is. And if you think about the countries that those, I mean, you're probably talking Italy. Well, you're not talking Eurozone countries. You're probably talking just major economies though, like Brazil and Mexico, and the only ones that would be bigger, U.S., China, Japan, the Euro, and there's probably one more. But
Maybe Russia, I'm guessing. But
yeah,
yeah, but if you think of the impact, and we're gonna get into that here in a few minutes. But I've got for the listeners, Lee and I did talk about what we were going to cover during the podcast, but I'm going to throw him a couple curveballs because it's just kind of the way I am. But Lee, when you took your blockchain training through IBM, I'm kind of curious. IBM, I know is deeply involved with Hyperledger. In that training, did you study a lot of other blockchain technologies, or was it primarily kind of focused around Hyperledger and enterprise blockchain?
it's a great question, and it's both. The first portion of the class, we did study just blockchain in general, the origins, permissionless. We looked at a bunch of different types of platforms and ways ways that blockchain is used, use cases. And then the second half, we dove pretty deeply into Hyperledger.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you mentioned that you're a non-technical, not or quasi-technical now, right? Why would non-technical or quasi-technical people like you really want to get into blockchain?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the problem that blockchain is solving. This the distributed digital ledger is an evolution on ledger technology that's not changed since Luca Pacioli invented double entry accounting over 1,000 years ago. You might want to check me on that date. It might have been just about 600 years ago, but anyways, centuries.
Wait a minute. You're saying that as if I might remember.
Well, I have a feeling that some of your listeners will Google it, and I think it was in the 11th century, but we'll have to defer to Google on that. But anyways, yeah, the evolution in ledger technology and the transfer of value that blockchain offers is staggering. And the reason why it's not been even more impactful than it already has is education and perception. And I think those are themes that run through the story of blockchain in the last decade. Is people think that it's really hard to understand, for one, and for two, it does have. It started out with a lot of negative press early on, and that's hard to overcome.
Well, and I'll tell you two things that strike me. One is you're right about what's really crazy about blockchain is it is ridiculously simple, and sometimes people have a hard time understanding the complexity of something that's so simple. And secondly, what's really fascinating is if you think about who really proved Bitcoin, right? It was essentially the terrorists, the drug dealers, and the criminals who couldn't use a conventional banking system, right? If they had a transaction go wrong, they couldn't call their insurance company or report it to the police, right? They're the ones that basically proved that Bitcoin could be trusted, right? And what's really fascinating is, who's going to prove that that blockchain works at an enterprise or a government level?
I
China.
have no idea. I feel like you're going to tell me though.
Yeah, China. China is good because if you look at what they're doing, they're the ones that essentially are rolling this out. So it's fascinating. You just need some entity or group to go out and do this thing, and then everybody else sort of follows along. And they don't necessarily even have to be good actors, right? But they definitely have proved this stuff. So
Yeah,
so you're ingrained pretty deep in Texas. Have you lived in Texas all your life?
I have, except for a little bit in Virginia and Georgia with the military, but those were brief stints.
Gotcha. And do you have a pair of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat?
I do have boots, but no hat.
Okay, well then there goes some of your credibility. But
Right,
so,
right.
but I do know you love Texas, and you're working closely with the Texas legislature and all those. So if somebody's got a blockchain project, right, what would encourage them? What would be some reasons, some advantages that Texas has that would compel them or inspire them to move to Texas?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is, and I've talked about this before. If people have heard me talk about Texas and the things that we have to offer as a state, we have a $1.8 trillion GDP, second only to California in the States, and would be the ninth largest economy in the world if Texas were its own country. And then in regards to taxes, we have a strong, and everyone knows this, but especially when you're considering corporate income tax, there's a zero corporate income tax rate in Texas, one of just a handful of states that have that. California is certainly not one of them. There is a small gross receipts tax, but it's pretty minimal. We have a zero income tax in the state of Texas, and we have really aggressive local, city, and state economic development units, whether that's an economic development corporation or a unit of government that's going out and conducting BD to pull in companies from other parts of the world and other parts of the U.S. We have aggressive folks running those groups and units, and they have a lot of tax incentives at their disposal to entice companies in. And even on top of all those things as well, we've got a dynamic workforce here. Education institutions like University of Texas, UT Dallas, especially in blockchain. You've got University of North Texas, UT Dallas, which are really strong in engineering, fintech, blockchain, all those spaces. And then tier one research institutions like UT and A&M. And then Austin is a big draw too. Austin's a big tech hub, and not to mention all the other industries, energy down in Houston, banking, finance, real estate in Dallas. Of course, each city has a lot of all of those things, but that's what they're mostly known for. And Dallas is the third largest metro area in the U.S. We just overtook Chicago. So lots of economic activity, great place to live. And three major tech hubs.
You might be the ninth largest economy, but you fall behind Bitcoin. But that's okay. That's a state, right? So listen, you mentioned energy, right? I want to sort of peel the onion back on just a couple of the things that you talked about. What do you think? See the intersection, or if you've had any interaction and stuff. What do you see the intersection of either blockchain or cryptocurrency in the energy space? Any interesting thoughts there?
Yeah, a couple. I'll start with the cryptocurrency connections in Texas energy. Texas is a deregulated energy market, and we actually are our only state that has its own energy grid for the majority of the state. Most states are on a several states on a grid together. So it provides us some unique flexibility and really, really low power prices. I mean, you can get, a couple cents per kilowatt hour power in Texas in certain places, depending on the contract and the location and all the different factors. But that's a huge advantage for miners, and we're going to be one of the, and we already are, but we'll be one of the largest jurisdictions for Bitcoin mining, in the world in the coming months and years. I know China's got a 50% of the global Bitcoin mining capacity right now, but I think they're at their top. I think it's at the peak, and then we're going to see places around the world really figure out how to get cheap power, and Texas is going to be one of those places, and we're going to increase our share of the amount of mining that takes place in Texas globally.
So we've got a pretty big community of folks interested in mining. If they're interested in potentially exploring discounted energy rates for mining, is there, and we can add this to the show notes later, but is there an entity, an organization that they should be in contact with to talk about potential mining contracts?
Yeah, we're happy to make those connections. I will defer that to the show notes. You can feel free to put my email in the show notes, lee@texasblockchaincouncil.com, and make those connections with the groups, the mining groups and other energy groups offline. just because I got to check with them first when making introductions. But we
Right.
do have some big players in the mining space that are here, and some of that stuff is on the web, some of it's not. So people can probably find quite a bit of it open source as well.
It's really fascinating. So somebody shared this with me earlier. Bitcoin is I really think that Bitcoin is probably one of the only really decentralized currencies, right? Because even if you look at Ethereum, I think I heard the number that some very high percentage, maybe 95% of Ethereum nodes are all on either Azure or AWS, right? And so if that's true, then I ask myself the question: well, how decentralized is that really? If all the nodes on the network basically uh, are sitting on top of two different companies, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, how what their ability is, but that seems to be a big point of at least concern or something to look at. But Bitcoin, and the other thing that is fascinating is we're talking about the energy consumption for Bitcoin. Most people don't really understand the relationship, right, between the difficulty rate, the price of Bitcoin, the miners' incentives, and it's really a fascinating topic on how all of those things kind of work together um, in an ecosystem. And so, energy is just such a huge part of that conversation.
Yeah, it really is. And we're a big tent organization in that we've got cryptocurrency, we've got miners, we've got a lot of blockchain companies in different industry verticals. So we try to stay out of those. There's at times friendly competition and squabbles between different advocates for different cryptocurrencies or different use cases. So we're pretty neutral on that. But I do tend to agree with you though. Bitcoin is much more decentralized, but Ethereum-based platforms, have their uses, and ERC E20 tokens are unique, and I think people are taking those to their logical ends right now. We're in the midst of a yield farming craze and DeFi craze that is taking the Ethereum gas fees through the roof these days. So yeah, it should be interesting to follow all that.
Well, I think it's more just a testimony of how early this industry is, right? Because so my basic premise is I think it's headed towards decentralization. But even a lot of these projects that claim to be decentralized, they're just kind of baby projects and baby currencies and baby tokens. And I think eventually they will be much more decentralized than they are. But it's so young, so early in that space that
Mm.
um, I think it's not quite as decentralized as people think. When you look at a lot of these companies and a lot of the projects, they've got a very small number of nodes. Um, Again, I think that will change over time. I just think it's more a testimony of where we are in the timeline. Um,
Right.
but
Right.
hey, so listen, I know that Texas is interested in attracting projects and uh, to Texas, and I'm a big fan because I do have cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, but I don't have any cows. So according to George Bush, I'm a faux cowboy. but uh, but but what are some so why what are some barriers that make it difficult for states uh, to welcome blockchain projects, and maybe how does that compare and contrast to what Texas is doing?
That's a great question. It is unique to different states, but I think big states like Texas, California, New York, and Florida are similar, even though the way those states are run are quite different. They're similar in their size and their incumbent industries influence. So, states like that will have a pretty entrenched incumbent industries, and that's entrenched power just in whether it's inertia or within the government structure in the legislature. They just have a lot of influence. But we're finding in Texas that really we're able to communicate and work with and come alongside some incumbent industries in ways that we didn't expect. And the biggest obstacle for us, and I think this was probably going to be similar in other states as well, is the perception and the education. The perception, because a lot of elected officials their time is pulled in so many different directions. They really have only had time to digest, the talking points and the talking heads on the various news outlets who only will spend a very brief segment on cryptocurrency or blockchain, and in the past it's been in a negative way, and so that's maybe all they have heard about the technology. And from an education perspective too, it just takes a lot of time. Again, their time is stretched, and it does take a lot of time to convey the value and explain the technology for one, and then convey the value add that it brings. And not everybody has time to do that, which is why it's so important for us to have organizations like the Texas Blockchain Council. I know there's one in Florida as well. There's obviously one in Wyoming. And we need these kinds of organizations because startups don't have time to educate elected officials and government officials and policymakers. They're busy with their projects and with their investors, and they're actually getting their company off the ground and making money. So that's what I found. I've connected with a ton of very bright subject matter experts, but a lot of them are just very busy in their projects, and they don't want to take time to build the relationships with the elected officials. What we will have them do, though, is we'll build the infrastructure, and then we'll bring the subject matter experts in to testify in front of the Texas legislature, and that'll be a kind of a marriage of the subject matter expertise marrying into the infrastructure that we've built and the relationships that we've built. But that's one of the challenges is getting the subject matter experts in front of the people that need to learn about it.
One of the events, and I think you and I have talked about it, I think you're actually speaking at it, is an event that we're doing in March of 2021 in Washington, D.C. called Blockchain Use for State and Local Governance. And our goal is to connect with all of those different councils in all the different states, right, and bring them all we're going to bring them to the D.C. government, and for a full day, have them all share with what they're doing with regard to land titling and voting and, all of the different, the regulatory issues that states have to deal with. And because it's so important for you to bring experts to your community there in Texas, but then I think it's also important to bring all of those folks together because they're all dealing with the same use cases, right? They're all dealing with insurance and licensing and permitting and emergency management and all those different subjects. So I'm really excited about that event. And I think you are speaking at that one, right?
I am, yeah. And thanks for including me in that.
Oh yeah, no. Listen, I got to say I'm a big fan of Texas, and I'm really excited about the bridge. And what we'll do after the show is I want to get you connected with John Carpenter, who's he's our central. We have an East Coast lead, Silvio out of Florida. We got John Carpenter out of Colorado, and Alex out of California, and they connect with all the local state folks. So getting you guys all connected in advance of that event, so you can all connect, communicate, and collaborate. It would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'd love to. And if for listeners who are interested in that, I was driving home the other day. This would have been 2 days ago, listening to a podcast from The Economist, which is a big publication out of the UK. They do geopolitics, but they also do business and economics. And their article titled Paper Trails, COVID-19 is spurring the digitization of government. And in that article, The Economist basically lays out all of the reasons why these organizations in the different states are so important, because the title is self-explanatory. COVID has really accelerated the timetable for governments to adopt emerging technology like blockchain. And we can't just digitize. We've got to digitize plus, you know, utilize the latest technology that's before us, and blockchain is a big piece of that, especially for governments, because a lot of what they do is record keeping and ledgers, and act as an arbiter and a neutral um, maintainer of the record. And if they're doing it on antiquated systems and archaic mainframe computers right now, they're not doing it in the way that's best for taxpayer resources, and the most efficient way for that value to be communicated and demonstrated in a digital world. So if listeners could check that article out, I think it'd be very, very beneficial.
In January of this year, we had our first event at the U.S. Capitol called the Future of Money Governance and the Law. And Scott Stornetta was one of our speakers. He basically he and his research partner invented blockchain in 1991, right? And his work was cited Satoshi's white paper cites his work. 3 out of the 8 references are to their work. And what drove him, he said he realized that the world was going increasingly digital, right? And you can go to a digital document, make a change, and no one would know, right? And he said to himself, what would it be like to live in a world where you couldn't trust records? If all the records are going digital and anybody could make a change, right? Then what would that kind of world look like? And that's what really drove him in their early research. And interestingly enough, they tried and they tried and they tried, and they just couldn't figure out how to do it, right? So he came into his research partner. He said, "Listen, this just can't be done. Why don't we at least write a paper talking about how it can't be done, so we get something out of it?" And his research partner agreed. And so, as he was thinking through why it couldn't be done, he was having dinner with his wife, and at a restaurant, and it occurred to him that if two people, if somebody wanted to change a record, the two parties would have to, they would have to be in collusion together, right? And the only way to stop it would be to have a third person validate that they hadn't done it. But those 3 people could be in collusion, so you'd need a fourth and a fifth, and so the problem just extended itself out. And so he's having dinner with his wife, and this thought flashed through his mind: when enough people are involved in the collusion, it's no longer collusion, it's consensus. And he looked up at her and he said, I think I just figured something out, and I think it might be important.
Wow.
But yeah, no, if the governments are going towards these digital records, then we really need integrity, right? That's one of the things that integrity and our trust in government has been, and large institutions have been on the decline since the 50s. And boy, gosh, it's such an important thing. Let me ask you again, or let me keep going. As far as states are concerned, what kinds of things do states regulate that really kind of matter to blockchain businesses? And doesn't the SEC and FINRA already regulate most of those things? What's that intersection between federal regulation and state regulation, and what's going on in that space?
The SEC and FINRA really should regulate most things about securities, cryptocurrencies, regardless of, it supersedes what a state would do in most cases, and I'll say most cases. But the SEC has failed to provide as much guidance and clarity as is needed for these cryptocurrency companies, especially in the realm of securities, and the IRS as well. And there's just a lack of clarity from the federal level. So when that is the case, there are times in which the SEC gives the green light for states to conduct a little bit of policy experimentation. And maybe they don't say that explicitly, but Hester Pierce has mentioned she's one of the SEC commissioners. She's mentioned policy experimentation before. And so I think the green light is really out there for states to experiment with this. And Wyoming has taken the lead with 13 blockchain bills. They had their speedy legislation, special purpose depository institution that Caitlin Long has spearheaded, and her Avanti Bank is one of the first to apply for the license for that. But there really are a lot of things that happen at the state level that people just don't think about. They're not they're not top of mind. The Texas Banking Commission regulates the money transmitter licenses in Texas, and there's some exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges, that don't have a presence in Texas because they have not received that MTL approval. The Texas State Securities Board has been pretty active in some of these crypto projects and blockchain projects where they've actually sent cease and desist letters out to fraudulent, ICO 2018 type ICOs, the ones that are really pushing the limits and may not have a viable project, but are trying to rake in as much investment as possible. And I think that's healthy. I think some people were frustrated with the Texas State Securities Board at the time and over the last couple of years, but it's healthy to root out the bad actors. So we need agencies like those that are educated and involved in regulating properly for the space to succeed as a whole. So in the absence of guidance from the federal government, those agencies in Texas have a say. Of course, the state legislature has a bigger say, and that's kind of a loose cannon. But we are navigating that space. We have a lot of legislative partners. We call them legislative champions because they're sponsoring legislation in the emerging tech and blockchain space. We can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the last thing that I think the listeners will be interested to know about in regards to states is the Uniform Commercial Code. Our attorneys that are part of our industry association, the Texas Blockchain Council, have continued to stress this to me time and again, in that the Uniform Commercial Code, even though it's mundane and it's just the laws about doing business, that's where the foundation of commercial law is found, and that's where we need to start with blockchain. So some of that needs to be changed in legislation. It's mostly definitional changes and things that are rather uncontroversial. And we're using Wyoming as a model to see what they did and adopt some of those things. Of course, it's a different context, so our existing legislation looks a little bit it's unique, and we take it from there. But those are really some of the things that states regulate that matter to blockchain businesses, on top of the things that we mentioned earlier about taxes and incentives and other ways that states can attract blockchain investment. And we're really looking at Texas. We're looking to attract two things. We're looking to attract blockchain talent and businesses, and the other thing is we're looking to attract venture capital to Texas.
So, gosh, I want to talk about all three of those things. Okay, so so let me come back to the venture capital. So don't let me forget that one and the talent. But let me talk about the I know that a lot of projects. One of the things that they're really worried about, and why many of them actually leave the United States and go outside of the country, is because of the regulatory lack of clarity, right? And so you sort of talked about this. I'm wondering if you might be able to peel the onion back on this. So if I'm here in say, Virginia, and I've got a project, and that project includes the use of some kind of a token, and I'm wondering, is the SEC going to consider this a security? Am I going to have to deal with all the securities requirements, or am I going to be considered an MSB? All of those kinds of questions, right? Is coming to Texas in any way going to help me sort of navigate those waters, because they're very expensive waters to navigate? Is there any help that Texas can provide with providing some clarity there?
I shouldn't go too deep into that with the disclaimer that anything that we're talking about here is obviously not investment advice, nor am I a professional attorney in the realm of securities law by any stretch of the imagination. So my first recommendation would be just to consult your attorney and see jurisdictionally where they think. But that is certainly what we're trying to do, is to make Texas a jurisdiction of choice for these companies to come. And, we don't really have anything yet that would set us apart from, as far as securities law, that would set us apart from other states. So I don't, and I don't feel qualified to comment on that. Again, I would just recommend listeners to consult their attorneys on those items. But what we are doing is we are changing the rule book a little bit with the help of the legislature. That's the only way to change the rule book in regards to law in Texas. I guess precedent is another way, but we don't have that kind of luxury where we don't have the mind control for judicial decisions. But yeah, we're working with the Texas legislature to make those kinds of adjustments that would make Texas a better jurisdiction for companies to come. And really, in the end, on the securities thing, that's going to have to be an SEC deal, except for the OCC recently coming out with saying that banks can custody digital assets. That was huge, and so states can play a little bit of a role in as far as banking licenses. So it really depends on in your space, if it's cryptocurrency, digital assets, what you're looking at. And I'm certainly not qualified to give that kind of advice, but I know who is. And so we've got a lot of attorneys that are on our board and that are members of the organization that are well versed in those things.
So if folks would like to explore that further, they could reach out to you and you could at least answer the questions sort of one-on-one, or point them in the direction of somebody who's qualified to be able to answer them.
Right. And I won't say that our attorneys are going to volunteer their time, but I will say that they have volunteered their time thus far for us as an organization as we're drafting some of this legislation. So that just goes, and that's pretty common in the blockchain space, right? People are really passionate about the technology, so that's why you get these fair coin launches. People are just, the founders aren't even taking a stake, or they're not taking a distribution of tokens at the beginning. They're just letting the protocol run and taking part of it as if they're a normal participant who just discovered it on Reddit or some other platform. That happens in blockchain too, and so we're grateful to have those kinds of minds that are willing to help us out and do that at a pro bono.
Yeah, well, and there are bills bouncing around Congress right now, the Token Taxonomy Act, and actually a number of bills where they're trying to bring some regulatory clarity. But I think that kind of goes back to where we are just in the life cycle of this, because as an example, if you're a bank, right, you're a money services business, you're really not allowed to do business with certain bad actors, right? So there's a list of these accounts that you can't do business with. But in a cryptocurrency transaction, or if you're using a hardware wallet, every transaction generates a new address, right? And so those laws and requirements and restrictions don't make any sense. So the stuff you were talking about before, going back to the paradigms of basic how is government business done. Gosh, there's a lot of work that we need you guys to do to sort of reestablish what that landscape looks like, so that we can move forward. So I'm really grateful for the work that you guys are doing there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the Texas Blockchain Council specifically is aiming to accomplish in the next, in the next year or so?
Right. Yeah, we're looking to pass pieces of legislation with, of course, our legislative champions are sponsoring this legislation. It'll go through the regular legislative process, and we have no illusions that we'll be the only people that have influence over what gets passed. We recognize that it takes a village, and we have a seat at the table, though, and we're grateful for that. So our 4 initiatives are a blockchain working group bill. It's House Bill 4517 from last session. By the way, the Texas session starts in January, so we'll file these bills. Our legislative champions will file the bills in November after the election, and then the session will begin in January. The House Bill 4517, it'll have a different number in the next session, and a different docket number, but that is probably the easiest lift of all those bills. It's revenue neutral. We're just establishing a working group appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, 14-member working group. The next initiative is the Texas Blockchain Service Network, a service network that obviously is able to be utilized by anyone anywhere in the world, but that specifically companies and the Texas government are using, standing up nodes and operating within a service network that's slightly the economics of the model will make sense to use it if you are doing business in Texas, or if you're regulated by a Texas agency, or if you just need to do data sharing or information sharing with a Texas agency. And so we hope that can be a model for the United States at some point. There's a lot of work and a lot of people who are working on that project who are much more well-versed on it than I. So if you could do a whole episode sometime with some of our SMEs on the blockchain service network, but it really does compete with, and it doesn't yet because we're not to the point, but at some point soon, it will compete with the Chinese blockchain service network and the European Blockchain Service Initiative, the EBSI. So those are the first two. We're also looking at digital identity, not necessarily compelling digital identity, but making digital identity, the ability to use digital identity, viable in certain commercial circumstances. So that's as vague as I'm going to be right now, because that's a heavy lift, and there's a lot of we're not going to be very aggressive on that front, just because we recognize it's a lot politically to tackle. And then lastly, changes to the Uniform Commercial Code, which again, revenue neutral. It's just definitional changes. We're working with the Texas Department of Banking, which otherwise known as the Texas Banking Commission. The Texas Banking Commissioner himself is been on the phone with us a couple of times, offered just wanting to make sure that he and his legal team are appraised about what our research, so that they can speak into it. And that's part of the process. Is we just want to be collaborative with all the stakeholders and make sure that the government agencies are taking part in this process as well. It's a discovery process for all of us, and we're grateful for partners at TxDOT, which is the Texas Department of Transportation, and the Texas Secretary of State as well, who are just open to these conversations. So I won't say anything more about those conversations, but just that they're happening and it's exciting.
Awesome. And apparently, the Texas Blockchain Council is doing this through all your legislative partners, the research, the advocacy. I mean, it's just some pretty cool stuff. So I told you earlier that one of the things I wanted to do was hear about all the stuff that you're doing, and then share with you some of the stuff that GBA is doing, and some places where people who are interested in some of these topics could connect. So so you can sort of sit down and relax, and I'll tell you about some of this stuff, and then after that, I want to have you tell us kind of a little bit about how people can get in touch with you, and like I said, we'll put that in the show notes. But you talk about land registration. So the GBA has, if you go to gbaglobal.org/working-groups, right? We have a land titling working group. It's led by a guy named John Dean Markunis, who, he's a world traveler. He's all over the world, working specifically on blockchain and land titling projects. So I would highly encourage whoever's interested in the subject to join that working group. As far as international studies, we have an international trade working group. So Juan Cabrera, he's out of London, leads that. In fact, during Government Blockchain Week, he's going to be hosting an event at the British Embassy. This is going to be March 20 to 23rd, I think, 22nd, 23rd. So if you're interested in that, I would highly encourage you to join the International Trade Working Group. And then they're all the thing that's fascinating about the International Trade Working Group is they also have to work with the other groups that are dealing with cross-border payments and logistics and supply chain, and it's really it's all interconnected. Then we've got Chris Peoples leads our energy working group. So Jiminy Crickets, they're. I wish we really ought to do an entire podcast on energy, and we ought to get Chris involved and some of the folks from that working group on the call, and some of the folks there from Texas, because that would just be a phenomenal conversation. We have a mining and cryptocurrency working group, and there's really two places. There's really two places where I really see this connecting. One is all the mining stuff that you're talking about, but the other thing is we're building something called a government business blockchain platform, which sounds really similar to the service network. But what the government business blockchain platform does is it's essentially for the use of government services, and it interconnects to all other blockchains. So if people have a Hyperledger blockchain with a government solutions or Ethereum or EOS or TON or any other blockchain, the government business blockchain platform is that infrastructure layer that allows information and assets to move in and between governments at local, state, national, and international levels and their constituents. So you talked a little bit about identity. We have an identity management working group led by Shiv Agarwal, and we're looking at creating interoperable identity management solutions for governments to be able to use. One of the areas where that's potentially going to be used is we just recently signed an MOU with the Union of Arab Banks, which is 250 banks in North Africa and the Middle East, which includes both central banks and retail banks. And so when you're talking about looking at your uniform commercial code and coming up with the different definitions, right? Interacting with our banking community and our UAB and all those folks. We have a government ontology group as well. I think that there's all kinds of different connections. So, Lee, I got to tell you, I'm totally jazzed about really kind of getting your group and your constituent connected with these different GBA working groups, because it's just phenomenal. And what I'd like to do is use our resources to really promote all the great work that you guys are doing in Texas. Right? We can send press releases out to about 2,000 media influencers a day. Our social media footprint's got about 100,000, and podcast. We've got this podcast. We've got a YouTube platform. We've got all sorts of mechanisms for really broadcasting the good work that you guys are doing, and really letting other states know what you're doing. So it would just be a shame for each of these states to reinvent the wheel when they're all trying to solve very similar problems. I love what you're doing with your service network, and I'd love to get you in touch with our CTO, Mark Wasser, who, if we can figure out interoperability between what you're doing, I think that would just be just phenomenal.
That would be great. I wasn't aware that you guys were working on that. So happy I will connect you to the team that's working on that from several of our member companies. There's folks at Highland software company. There are folks at Hedera Hashgraph. Those are probably the main.
Well, Highland is a GBA member, so we're working primarily with Highland credentials. That used to be.
That's the same one and the same Highland credentials.
Yeah. So Mary Strain, she leads our licensing and permitting group. So there's all kinds of just great opportunities. Listen, but we're almost at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much for sharing with our listeners what's going on in Texas, and let's schedule a call sometime down the road to connect these two incredible networks together.
Yeah, I'd love to. Definitely keep me posted, and we'll have some press releases coming down the pipe here in the next few weeks. So I'll reach out to you about that when the time comes.
All right, Lee. Well, listen, it was a pleasure, and I want to thank everybody for listening, and thanks for being part of the future of money governance and the law.